Everybody hear me okay?
Okay.
I usually speak quite loud, so I now have a microphone.
Dedicated
I
at
don't know.
advancing knowledge.
So my name is Jesse Hoey, and I'm a professor here
Teaching
at the University of Waterloo in
and
computer
community
science, and
outreach.
my research is in
professional fitness.
artificial intelligence. So
She's
I'm going
developed
to tell you a little bit about.
exercise-based
I'm
program.
trying to give you a little history of artificial intelligence.
Participants.
Just very brief,
Continue.
and then I'm going to talk a little bit about
She
where I
has held
think
various
artificial
positions
intelligence is
with
going
40
next, and try to
She
present
is
to you
member of the
some of
Canadian
the very
Society of
difficult
Exercise
challenges that I
Physiology.
tried to overcome in
And she has
building
attended
assistive
and
technologies to
presented
help people with
systems
Alzheimer's
prior
and
to
dementia
the certification
in
process.
in their later years.
Her research publication.
Okay, so first of all, I want to dedicate this talk to Michael Ferret, who was the president of the Research Institute for Aging, I think, where you were there last night. He passed away in 2017, but he was incredibly supportive of my work on Alzheimer's disease when I arrived at Waterloo. And he worked until I believe until very late in his life. He was an incredibly influential person for my career. So thank you, Mike.
And I'm just barely getting.
Okay, so artificial intelligence. I'm going to assume that people here are artificial intelligence experts. So I'm going to sort of don't know the history of AI. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the history of AI. And I like to start with this because people have been thinking about how to build artificial intelligence for thousands of years. In fact, the ancient Greeks had this idea about this robot, Talos. It was a personal security robot for Europa, but he was built by Hephaestus and funded by Zeus sometime around 400 BC. Okay, so that's not really where I guess people started thinking about it, but most people would say the first person to actually sort of scientifically try to address this question was Alan Turing. And you might have seen this movie, The Imitation Game, with Benedict Cumberbatch. And that was mostly about Alan Turing's work in breaking codes during the Second World War. So it was very important that figuring out what codes the Nazis were using these machines. But he also wrote this paper called Can Machines Think? And in it, he proposed this imitation game. So this was an idea of how do we tell if we've built a machine that's intelligent? Well, his thought was you sit down, you have a judge, a human being, sit down in front of two computer terminals, and they type messages to somebody on the other side. One of them, there's a human on the other side, and one of them is a robot on the other side.
Which will provide you
an artificial intelligence.
pages.
And if the human judge can't tell the difference, then we would say that's intelligible. So, there's lots of arguments against this definition of intelligence. And most of them have to do with, this setup not allowing the human or the robot to be embodied, right? There's no sense of being in the world. And I think that's a very important challenge, in fact. But nevertheless, people started working on this. Can we build a chatbot that will be like indistinguishable from a human being? And sort of one of the very first ones was written by Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT in 1966. It was called Eliza. Eliza was supposed to be like a psychotherapist. So here I am talking to Eliza. You can still talk to this thing, still exists online. And you had sort of a bag of tricks that it would use. So here I'm saying, I feel worried. And then later on in the conversation, it says, earlier you said you felt worried. So it sort of almost feels like it's a little bit human, but it doesnn't take long before you figure out that it's definitely not a human being. But people kept going down this road, and there was this wealthy businessman, Dr. Loebner, who ran this competition for about 30 years called the Loebner Prize. And so he would invite a panel of judges, sometimes to his apartment in New York City, and then invite people to submit computer programs, and then would get these judges to try to see if the computer programs could pass the Turing. And the computer program that fooled the most judges for the longest would win the prize every year, right? And so you can see what happened was, of course, the big major research, computer science research institutes in the States poured tons of money into this because it would be so glorious to be the first one to pass the Turing test. And so this is a sample of some of the questions that are typical that the judges would ask. So here the Confederate is either the human or the robot. And the judge is asking sort of general knowledge questions like, which is bigger, a TV screen or Belgium, right? To see if it knows that. Sometimes some sort of gibberish, and then sometimes a little bit more abstract concepts, like what does it mean to be a queen, for instance. And so these teams were massive teams pouring huge amounts of money. They were building these huge computer programs that basically were like
Pretty
massive
aware
encyclopedias,
of
trying to
the benefits.
everything in the world it had to know about. Right?
That include us.
And then along came this guy, Ronald Carpenter, and
Didn't
he
take
was an
very much.
amateur, I think, when he started.
60
And he wrote this program called Jabberwack. And Jabberwacky won this competition 2 years in a row. The interesting thing about Jabberwacky, it was a very, very simple program. What it did was, it ignored what the judge said completely and just spat back garbage and jokes, right? So you can see here the judge saying, which is further away from us, Queens or Inner Mongolia? Jabberwacky says, ha, that was stupid, tell me a good joke next time.
Sort of
right?
break down the 20.
And so it's interesting to me because
Least,
this is completely ignoring what the other person is saying and just saying garbage and
they
nonsense.
built.
And that's what it seems more human than being able to answer all these questions about how big Belgium is, right? So there's something about human intelligence that also involves sort of human stupidity, I guess, if you will. So if we really wanted to tell, the fact that this guy won the competition with this really simple program was an indication that there really is a lot more going on behind intelligence than just
Sleeping well.
the size of Belgium.
Again, a link to the 24-hour movie.
And now, of course, we have these Chat GPT. So who here has tried one of these Chat GPT things? Okay, so good sample. I actually gave a talk last week to a group of high school girls who were here on a conference. That's, we're trying to encourage more women to go into computer science. And so there's a group of 14-year-old women. And so I asked them, who here has used Chat GPT or something like that before? And every single hand went up. And then I said, who uses it to do their homework? Not a hand went up. But there was this kind of cheering in the audience, and the energy in the room was such that I could tell that maybe people weren't being quite as honest as they could have been.
Basic physiological function.
Okay, so here's me talking to Chat GPT, which is further away from us, Queens or Inner Mongolia. And it gives a very technical answer, which is very correct, right? But it's a little boring. It's not interesting. It says, okay, it depends where we are, which is further away from us, Queens or Inner Mongolia. Depends where us is located. Well, that's true. Certainly. Which is larger, your brain or Belgium? Belgium's land area is larger than my virtual brain. Belgium covers approximately 30,000 square kilometers, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, but again, kind of a little tedious. And of course, you can fool these things really easily. So this is me saying, which is heavier, a pound of bricks or an ounce of feathers? And so this is based on this old sort of riddle that we would say, oh, which is heavier, a pound of bricks or a pound of feathers? And then your friend goes, oh, a pound of bricks, of course, bricks are heavier than feathers, right? But the answer is no, they're the same weight because it's both a pound, okay? So then ChatGPT and these things know that. And so when you say, which is heavier, a pound of bricks or an ounce of feathers, it says, oh, they're both the same weight. I know that. I'm not going to get fooled by that stupid trick, right? Okay, so you might say that's sounds a little bit human, right? But I actually think that these tools are going to be very destructive. And I think that they are so because they don't have what's called skin in the game. They have no way of connecting what they're saying in response to their own survival. And I think that that's a very important part of being human, okay? So they don't have skin in the game. And the other thing is, I think it stifles innovation and creativity. I think it stifles diversity. So I'll give you an example. I had to teach this AI class, and the students have to submit a proposal, just a one-page thing, right? It's supposed to be very low bar. And so normally, there's supposed to be a research proposal. But these are fourth-year undergrads. They don't really know what a research proposal is. So normally you get this just incredible mess of things. Everything is horribly formatted and bad spelling, and nothing is, but it's incredibly diverse what everybody does. So this year, I do the same thing. I get all my research proposals, and I start reading them, and I say, boy, that one's well written. It's very clean, right? All the English is perfect. And then I get another one, same thing, very clean, but strangely almost the same as the previous one. A different research topic, but pretty much the same text, right? So there goes diversity, something that we all are trying to value right now in academic environments. Gone. Diversity is finished. And I think that that's the scary part of these tools, is that if people believe in the hype, they will get fooled into throwing out their own creativity and innovation. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. We can talk about that at length. Certainly I can, but I'm going to switch gears now and talk about a few other parts of AI. That stop working? What's that? Okay. All right. This is off now, I think, but I think they're trying to record it. So you can still hear it?
No longer go store to store. walk
What's that?
around.
Yeah, it's green. Yeah. Turn it off? Wait, I can't use this thing? Games, so games were very, can you hear me in the back if I'm just speaking without the, okay. So games were a very popular topic in artificial intelligence because that seems to be something that we can do that, you know, animals can't do. We can play chess, right? And so 1996, IBM had this big flashy thing called Deep Blue, and they beat Gary Kasparov, who was the then world champion grandmaster in a game of chess. And so Deep Blue and IBM were running around saying, that's it, just sort of like what you hear nowadays. Oh, AI is here, we're in control of it, we've got everything all figured out. Of course, all it did is play chess, this computer program. That's all it could do. And in fact, it couldn't even do that very well because Kasparov, most people don't know that they played 6 matches together, and Kasparov won 3 of them, and Deep Blue won 2, and there was 1 draw. So Kasparov was able to figure out what was going on with this artificial intelligence and then get around it, right? But people kept on going. Now we have computer programs that are definitely better than all human beings. And people started looking at harder games like the game of Go, which was, they beat the world champion in 2016. And then you see a lot of artificial intelligence used in sort of these kind of games, which maybe you play yourself, or maybe you have some of your younger family members enjoy these kinds of games, and all of the non-player characters in the game are controlled by, so they have to look like they're doing things that are intelligent. Robotics was another major area of research in AI, starting from maybe Shaky, which was designed at SRI in '71, and then many very important applications in industrial robot design, and also in search and rescue and battlefield operations, where robots can be incredibly useful. Autonomous robots, so things that are able to actually act on their own, can be very useful for situations that are very dangerous for human beings. And then here on the right, I've got a humanoid. So there's a sort of subgroup of people working on artificial intelligence and robots that want to try to build robots that are indistinguishable from humans, right? So let's not talk about that anymore. That sounds a little weird. But the other thing that happened was that in the 90s, the artificial intelligence community launched this challenge and said that can the artificial intelligence community build a team of robot soccer players that can beat the human world champions by the year 2050? Okay. And this was probably in 1995 that this challenge was initiated. And here we are. So every year they have RoboCup, which is all these teams enter and try to play one another, and then one team wins the competition. So that's what it looked like in 2017. So it doesn't look that different today. So they have all sorts of rules. Yeah, the humans are not allowed to go in and interfere. So, but I guess I'll leave it up to you to think about whether we're actually going to be able to pull this off. You have to be a little bit careful because obviously you can't build a robot that can kick the soccer ball at the speed of sound, right? You have to sort of limit the robots to be able to do sort of what humans can do. I had dabbled in robotics myself a little bit before I realized what a horribly infernal thing it is to try to do. And I participated in this team when I was doing my PhD at UBC, and we built the robot waiter. And the robot waiter would go at a reception, everybody's standing around, and it would carry this tray of food, and it would go up to people and say, "Can I offer you an appetizer?" And then, "Oh, thank you," and so on and so forth. And it had to do a bunch of things like know when there was no food left and go back and get some more and so on. And so we built this robot, and then we went down to Seattle and we participated in the AAAI, which is one of the big AI institutions. They had a mobile robot competition for robot waiters. And we won this competition and came back to Canada, and great fame ensued, and we had TV interviews, and here we are with the then Minister of Science and Technology. So we were invited to Ottawa to show this off, and that was really great. I learned two things from this experience, though. The first one was right before we actually had to do the competition, my good friend and also a PhD candidate at the time, Don Murray, and I walked across the street in Seattle to the thrift store and bought this sort of tuxedo looking thing and a pair of white gloves. And we put that on the robot. And I think that's one of the reasons we won the competition, because ours was the only robot that looked like a waiter, right? Our robot normally looks like that up there. It's just this ugly sort of cylinder, right? And so one of the robots there was an upside down garbage can. Well, ours looked like a waiter, right? So that's, I think, one of the reasons we won. The other reason was, I think, well, the other take home message that I got was watching the robot interact in a group of people. You know, you'd have all these big businessmen standing around, or business people standing around talking to each other, and this robot would come wandering by. And we'd programmed the robot so that if somebody took a piece of food from its tray without it offering the food first, it would get them in trouble. It would say, "Stop stealing food from the tray." And so it was amazing to see these, you know, they're big, talking about big important things. Then this robot comes wandering by and they grab a piece of food, says, "Stop stealing food from the tray." And they go and they put it back and they, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And then the amazing thing is they just go right back to their conversation as if nothing happened, right? And I wanted to go up and say, "You just realized you said sorry to a robot, right?" So people, the second lesson is people are really willing to anthropomorphize things, right? To treat them as if they're human beings. And certainly if you have something dressed in a nice suit, they're probably even more willing to do that. Okay, so a lot of the technologies that we worked on in those days eventually ended up in self-driving cars. So this one here is probably the first self-driving car to really sort of be able to call itself self-driving, built at Stanford in 2005. There's the cute little Google car. And now we see these things on the road. Well, maybe not so much in Canada, but in California, you can take a taxi that has no driver now. So I guess these things are coming. And then, of course, there's a branch of research that says, well, if you're going to have self-driving cars, then you might as well take out the stoplights. You don't need them anymore because all the cars can just book their passages through the intersections. Right? So you have to kind of think about whether you'd be comfortable sitting in a car like that, going through this giant intersection. But okay, so these self-driving cars are kind of here. But one of the things about the self-driving cars that I think deserves some extra attention is that they have no idea what a human being is, okay? And you can see this when they have this problem, apparently, when they get to four-way stops, right? So you've probably had this experience. You get to a four-way stop at exactly the same moment as another car, and you have to kind of do this thing where you sort of negotiate passage, right? You sort of catch their eye or something. So here's a comic strip where a pedestrian and a self-driving car are trying to get through, and the pedestrian saying, you know, what if I point my arms and flail around, and the car is just completely confused, all right? And this quote from Don Norman, I think, is really on point because he says, these cars have to learn to be aggressive in the right amount, and the right amount depends on the culture, right? So if you go to California, they solve this problem just whoever's got the biggest truck goes first, right? And here in Canada, we're also busy, you know, letting the other guy go first that nobody ever gets through the intersection. So, but the interesting thing is that the cars they were building, all of this artificial intelligence, the games AI, the chatbots, all of these things, they have no idea what a human being is, what it means to be human. And I think this comes back to that embodiment problem, right? These cars have never felt the wind on their face. They don't know what that feels like. They don't know what it means to be a human being. And one of the main objectives of AI was to try to study what it means to be intelligent, right? It was a way to try to understand intelligence. What is it? It's not something we understand very well. And to me, now we're building what people are calling AI, but it has no concept of what a human being is, which seems to me to be a big contradiction, right? So in order to sort of approach this problem, we need to think a little bit about what it means to be human, okay? And so, well, what does it mean? What do AI and humans have in common? Okay, we can ask that question. Well, they have this sort of element of rationality and maturity, right? So you might question the rationality and maturity of some human beings. Most are able to do things like, you know, play a game of chess, badly maybe, but drive a car and so on. Whereas animals and non-AI machines are not able to do this, right? So they are irrational and childlike. So social psychologists call this a dimension of human uniqueness, and its opposite is animalistic dehumanization. So telling somebody that they're like a rat, right, or something like that is very negative, very sort of saying you're not human. It's something that negative political groups will often use in order to ostracize certain groups of people. So how are humans and AI different? Well, the way that they're different is that AI and machines have no emotionality. They have no warmth, right? Whereas animals do. If you own a pet, you get a lot of empathy from your pet, right? They sort of recognize your emotional state in some sense. So this is a dimension of sort of human nature, and its opposite is mechanistic dehumanization. So you say to your friend, "Oh, you're behaving like a robot," right? And that means they're not behaving in a human-like way. All right, so my objective in my work has always been to see if we can take AI and move it across this boundary. Can we give AI the ability to sort of handle human emotions, to understand human emotions, right? And to use them in somewhat the same way that humans do. And I think this is where the real difficult problem of artificial intelligence still lies. And so I'm a member of this sort of sub-community of artificial intelligence. We call this affective computing. So people in affective computing are interested in artificial intelligence, but in putting in some kind of degree of emotionality into it. And the field was, well, most people would say, was started by Roz Picard, who was a professor at MIT in 1997. And she wrote the book, literally, called Affective Computing. And the book opens with this line. It says, this book proposes that we give computers the ability to recognize, express, and in some cases, have emotions. Is this not absurd? Right? So in 1997, most of the artificial intelligence community would say, yes, that's absurd, right? And if anybody who had not been an MIT professor had tried to say that, they probably would have gotten laughed out of the room, right? And so it is absurd. Well, they thought it was absurd because in those days, the prevailing notion of emotions was that they were something destructive, something that, you know, made your life harder. You were not able to make rational choices when you had these emotional disruptions, right? We now know that that's not the case. Humans are very dependent on their emotional processing centers in the brain to give them motivation to act and to help us that guides us towards more cooperative and collaborative solutions, right? They're very based on sort of social ideas of how can we work together as human beings. The sort of emotions are somewhat our social glue, the thing that holds us together, right? And so they're based in a lot of cultural and obviously affective factors. So we now have an IEEE transactions on affective computing. So that's like one of the big science and engineering journals. So we sort of get one of these journals as a big means your field is sort of on the map. We have an international conference. And like I said, we have this sort of increasing awareness that emotions play a significant role in human intelligence, but we still don't have emotional machines, right? We'd have machines like these self-driving cars that have no idea what a human being is. So you can ask yourself the question, why not? And I'll leave that for you for your homework tonight. And but we can talk about it later. What I'm going to do now is switch gears a little bit and tell you about some of my work in Alzheimer's and dementia. And what I hope to do with this example is to show you just how incredibly difficult it is to build a machine that helps a human being. Okay, and we're going to use the case of dementia as a case in point where it is incredibly difficult because it is an issue with a person's cognition.
Friends remained it after they adjusted for age.
Okay, so I started work on this after my PhD. I got a job as a postdoc at the University of Toronto, and we were working on building cognitive assistive technologies. So the idea was to build systems that can help a person when they are having some kind of cognitive impairment, and with a particular focus on Alzheimer's and dementia. And so I'm sure as many of you are aware, Alzheimer's and dementias are diseases that erase memory, particularly short-term memory, and they make it very difficult for people to, well, remember who they are, where they are, and also carry out basic activities of daily living, like getting their hands washed. And so the idea was, can we build technology? So normally they're helped by a human being. So if you will go to use the washroom, another person has to go in and remind you, okay, use the soap now. Because it's very hard for a person with dementia to remember what the steps are and even what the soap looks like. But of course, this creates a big burden on the human being, especially if it's a family member, right? Which it often is now, because the family member has to go into the bathroom with the person with dementia, right? And also, and even worse, it causes feelings of dependence in the person with dementia. They lose that independence. They lose that ability to do things themselves, which they're already struggling with, right? Because they've lost their sense of identity. They can't remember who they are. So I worked on this on a number of different areas. I'll tell you more about hand washing in a second. I worked on devices to help people do visual artwork, activities in the kitchen, reminders, and I worked on other cognitive disabilities as well, trying to encourage people to get back to work. And so since the days of starting this work, we formed in sort of about 2010, the AgeWell Network Centers of Excellence. There's a big Canadian funding initiative to try to pour a lot of funding into developing technologies to help people when they are aging, and particularly with cognitive disabilities associated with aging. So it's a very large network and has been very helpful in funding this kind of work. All right, so I'm going to show you a little vignette here. This is just a little comic strip which demonstrates what we'd hope to achieve with these kinds of systems. Okay, these little comic strips, what you're going to see are not just for dissemination. They're actually part of our research methodology, which I'll talk about a little later. So they're ways of trying to get people to engage in the conversation about what could a technology like this look like. So there's no sound, I don't think, but I'll just paraphrase it. There's not a lot of sound in here.
Dinner will be ready soon, Dad. Do you want to go wash up?
So she says, dinner will be ready soon, Dad. Do you want to go wash up?
These are things that you can do to achieve that. Implementing some must be restrained.
So he can't remember what to do. He doesn't remember why he's there. Then this little device above the mirror is going to give him a prompt.
Do you want to wash your hands?
So the device says, hey, Bill, do you want to wash your hands? And he says, oh, yes, that's what I want to do. And that gets him going. Okay. So the idea is the system will help him a few more times in this little video. But the idea is that meanwhile, his daughter is back out in the kitchen. She's making some food or whatever. She doesn't have to go into the washroom and make sure he's washed his hands. And he gets to exit the washroom and say, I did it, or I'm not, well, you know, I'm happy with himself. He's still able to wash his hands. So that's the idea. It eventually shows him a video on the screen as well.
Get this
So
food.
yeah, so it shows them a little demonstration, right? So there's some of the people we worked with, for instance, were unable to recognize what the soap looked like. So we were, did these trials where we had soap in a pump bottle. And so a person with severe dementia has never seen soap in a pump bottle before. So they couldn't use it. Okay, so anyways, that's the little video. And so throughout my trajectory in my career, I think I found sort of three major components in trying to develop a system like this. And the first one is functional, and that's what I worked on as a postdoc at the University of Toronto. And I was called in to help build this system that would help a person with dementia to get their hands washed. And our idea was to put a camera above the sink so we'd watch where their hands went. And then we had a set of speakers that would play a prompt, sort of like you saw in the video. It'd say, use the soap now, or something like that. And there was a video screen as well. And so we trialed this with a number of participants at a long-term care facility in Toronto. And it worked very well for probably maybe a third of the people we tried it with. Okay. And these are people with moderate to severe dementia. So that's sort of people that really struggle with doing these kinds of things. This was one of our star participants who was never able to wash her hands without human assistance. But with our system, she was able to wash her hands 100% of the time without human assistance. So that was great. And we thought, okay, it means that this is possible, right? About a third of the people, though, it didn't work. It didn't work at all, right? So we had one gentleman who would come in a wheelchair and he would just go to sleep. So not much we can do about that, right? We didn't have a robotic arm that could sort of poke him. And then a third of the people it worked really badly with. So we had one gentleman who he'd come in and then this voice would come over a set of speakers saying, use the soap now. and the voice was a male voice. And this guy would get very upset and start trying to punch the mirror. And so he had to be removed from this trial because he was safety concerns. But we found out later from his caregivers that he was a veteran. And to him, this voice coming over the set of speakers, he thought it was like he was in an army camp and it was a call to arms. And so that would make him very, very upset, right? And so that made me realize, this functional part's important. You have to be able to sense what's going on, decide and act. But then at the moment of actually trying to help the person, there's a whole lot more that goes on, right? And in this case, it was just the tone of voice. Maybe if we'd used a softer male voice or a female voice, it would have worked perfectly, right?
Yeah.
But the male voice worked great for our star participant. So it made me realize that there's all this other stuff going on, and there's all this knowledge in the caregivers. The caregivers know what's going on in these groups of people that they are trying to provide care to. So I went to the University of Dundee. That was my first academic appointment in 2006. And I started to work. They have a very strong human-computer interaction group there. That's people that study how humans interact with machines. And so I worked a lot on this problem of how do we try to sort of elicit knowledge from caregivers? How do we find out that before we start, this person's a veteran? They would be much more responsive to a female voice, let's say. And then the ability to customize and adapt these things. And this picture here shows one of the experiments that we did, which was a lot of this is talking to people, right? Talking to caregivers. And often that's why we made the vignettes. It's hard for people to sort of visualize what this might look like, right? If they've never, they don't know about these kinds of technologies. And so we built this smart home, but it was a doll's house. And they sort of had all these sensors in the smart home and, tell where the dolls were. And then we got caregivers of people with dementia to come in and express through playing in the doll's house what was going on in their professional lives dealing with dementia. And so this is one of these techniques that we use, a very interesting sort of human-computer interaction technique to try to understand, to get people to talk about what's going on in their situations. And I came to the University of Waterloo in 2010, and then really started working on this emotional issue, which had interested me all along. And I started to get very engaged in social, psychological, and sociological theories of emotion, which sort of talk a lot more about this idea of emotion as a sort of social glue that helps to bring people together, helps people to collaborate with one another. And that has a lot to do with culture, kind of like we saw with the self-driving cars, and it has to do with identity. Who do people think they are? How do people want to be treated, right? And so all of these things are very, very important when you're trying to develop technologies for persons with dementia.
I don't think for us.
I'll give you one. How much time do I have? I probably have enough time. So I'll give you one other example there. I had a gentleman that I worked with a group of caregivers I worked with in Cleveland at a long-term care facility. And they had one gentleman who was quite elderly, and he was refusing to eat. So this is something that happens quite often, and it's quite dangerous, right? We heard it before about the importance of nutrition. And the caregivers were tearing their hair out. They couldn't figure out how to convince this guy to eat, right? And nothing they could do trying to talk to him. You got to eat. It's important. Nutrition's important. You got to nothing would work. And then they realized this guy was an army officer and a veteran. And they had this great idea. They said to him, I can't remember his name, Mr. Williams, let's say. And they said, could you help us out? We have a lot of problems with people not eating. If you were to eat your dinner, it would demonstrate, it would help us because it would get other people to eat their dinner, right? And then bang, he started eating his dinner. So it was just reframing the problem in terms of his actual identity, which was an army officer, right? Army officers aren't told what to do. They tell people what to do, right? Or they lead, they're leaders, they demonstrate. As soon as this guy had the ability to be a leader, then bang, he was fine eating. I'm eating because I'm a leader. I'm not eating because these nurses are telling me that I need the nutrition, right? So that's a social identity. It was very important for him to feel that leadership, right? It self-actualized, allowed him to self-actualize. So a lot of my work recently has been in this area. These just four of the recent projects that I've worked on. And I'm just going to tell you very briefly about the sort of high level take home messages behind these things. The Act at Home project, we worked with a group, we've got the Research Institute for Aging there. They were involved in this, and Cleveland State University, my collaborators, and Kensington Health, which is a health group in Toronto. And the sort of big picture message that we found through a lot of interviews of caregivers, people with dementia, trying to understand these emotional alignment issues, was that people with dementia remember how they feel, not who they are. So there's a lot of evidence that in dementia, the emotional processing parts of the brain are still very much alive, very much have that sort of emotional memory, right? But what is gone is the ability to remember, names and places and things like that, right? So this schematic is supposed to show as you go through life, you acquire these different identities, right? These are, so I'm a father, I'm a husband, maybe I'm a lawyer, right? And then all together, that creates a sense of who you are. That's your sort of self in some sense. And then when dementia strikes, people lose the ability. They can't remember who they're supposed to be in given situations, but they remember how they're supposed to feel, right? The Army officer remembers, I'm supposed to feel like people are following me. That's how I feel, right? And I'll give you another example here. I worked with a lady in France on an art therapy project. So she was working on art therapy for people with dementia. And she was a Canadian woman living in France. And I worked with her on this art therapy project. And we had a wonderful relationship. And but she had this very sort of, I don't know, uniquely Canadian way of interacting with me, where she sort of poked fun at me, kind of ribbing me a little bit, right? And we both found that funny, and it made our relationship sort of fun. But it was sort of this very distinctly sort of Canadian. I can't describe it any better than that. Sort of a very Canadian way of an elderly woman interacting with a young man. And then so she got dementia, and the last time I saw her, she was severely demented, and she couldn't remember who I was. There's no way she could remember my name. She thought maybe I was her son or something like that. But this same exact sort of funny kind of ribbing thing that she used to do to me was still there, exactly the same way, right? And it felt the same. I could still go along. It still made us both laugh, right? So that emotional process and that memory of that emotional sensation is still very much there, very late into dementia, we believe. So this is a recent project. So this sort of shifted. I've now shifted so far away from the kind of technical aspects of artificial intelligence to these very kind of social aspects of trying to talk to people about what's involved. And this was a project that I did again in Cleveland with a group of caregivers, where we're trying to design now an app where they can keep track of their different charges, the people that they are caring for, and try to keep track of all these different identities. Like this guy sometimes thinks he's a lawyer, or, and to sort of promote this idea of emotional engagement with dementia, which the caregivers know. I mean, they're very familiar with this, right? And so I had this great experience where I had a postdoc who was down in Cleveland working with a set of caregivers, and they were working with these paper prototypes. This is very common in human-computer interaction, trying to design, okay, what could this app look like? And then I had a computer science undergraduate back in Waterloo who would actually code this up on a phone and produce an app. And then the next day, the caregivers could see, oh, there it is. It looks like that, right? And so we developed this application with them. This is still ongoing. There's a website that we've developed, but the app is not finalized yet. We're still looking for partners to develop it further. Okay, so that's a sort of big overview. I hope I sort of convinced you, or at least gave you the idea that artificial intelligence is not a solved problem, and I think it's very far from being a solved problem. So right now, there's a lot of hype that you hear about, oh, AI is here, it's all done, we're finished. I believe that that's not the case, very much so. And you hear this every 10 years in artificial intelligence, right? Oh, it's done. When Deep Blue beat Gary Kasparov, oh, we're done. We can all go home and retire, right? Of course, they weren't nearly done. Okay. So these are my sort of bullet points here. Emotions being a key part of human intelligence, and this idea that I'll just jump down. Emotional processing is preserved in dementia. So I think that assisting people with dementia, and there's many other challenging human problems that are also seeking to use artificial intelligence, I believe that they all need to have some kind of way of modeling human emotion. And I believe that these sociological views of emotion are very, very important in this respect. Oh, I had a video here too. This is kind of where we're at emotional robots right now. Again, a robot soccer player. Must have just let in a goal, and he's feeling very. Now he's really feeling bad. The emotional signals, you can kind of read them, right? But of course, this robot's not feeling that at all, right? It's just programmed to act like that. Nothing to do with emotions going on, but we might one day get there. So I'd like to just thank some of my recent and current collaborators and my wonderful students, and thank the funding that I've received, and I'm happy to take any questions. I think there is a microphone floating around somewhere if anybody, or you can just shout it out and I'll repeat the question. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so the ethical side, I mean, I think there's two sort of parts to that. One is the ethics in dementia, and in that work for dementia is one thing. It's a very difficult problem, right? Particularly because people with dementia can't give consent, right? So there's a big ethical issue just with doing research in that space. But I think that as far as sort of in general in AI, I think that again, emotions are a huge part of it, right? So I think that your idea of what is an ethics is sort of what is good and what is bad. Right there, you've got two emotional words that are opposite sides. I mean, that's, how I sort of see it, right? So unless we can understand human emotion I think, really from this sociological perspective, not from an individualistic perspective, right? Which is what a lot of people think emotions are. They're just these things that are bothersome, they're in you, and they're constantly messing things up, right? But I think that emotions are things that exist between people, right? And they are a property of groups, not individuals. And I think that, in fact, I believe that intelligence is a property of a group of individuals, not a single individual, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why we heard earlier about the importance of social connections, right? It's because that's what makes us human, are those social connections. So I think that studying ethics from that perspective is really important. But I mean, it's a can of worms. Like it's it's really hard. And there's a whole lot of work right now on sort of the ethics of artificial intelligence in general. And boy, I haven't seen much there that's very convincing, to be honest with you. So, but I hope that I can make a difference. I don't know. So, anyways, a great question. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Remote those who are not.
So
Application.
now.
Yeah.
An activity.
Yeah. 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 Yes, I guess, no, yes, it's sort of, so the question is artificial intelligence. There's a lot of people saying, yeah, it's all solved now. We've got this figured out. It's possible done for many applications, right? So if you want to send a robot into a minefield to clear the mines, you don't have to have human emotions, right? Just trying to get blown up. Essentially, industrial robots, but it's human being, that's what we're nowhere near being done, right? I believe so.
So basically deploy. I mean, medicine for me.
Yeah.
Into the game of that.
No.
But we are on the verge of, running with it.
I personally find it very frightening. I think that it is, that we're going to end up, in probably a long time. It takes people a long time to realize these kinds of mistakes, 100 years. But we'll look back and say, boy, that was a stupid thing to do, and not because we're going to get destroyed by robots, just because it's going to stifle innovation. We are going to become non-thinking. We're just going to, people won't be thinking for themselves anymore. And I think that stifling of diversity, right? That's one of the core things about humanity is that we're diverse, right? Even the fact women and men are different. That's really important, right? We see things from different perspectives, right? And these kinds of tools, remember, they're all built by big corporations that are only there to make profit in California, right? That's the only reason they're there. And what's amazing is that these are machine learning systems. And what a lot of people don't realize is machine learning systems are arbitrary. They always have an arbitrary threshold that you have to set, right? Who sets that threshold? Google does. That means that your life, your everything, if you're going to follow one of these things, it's determined by some people that are doing it for profit-seeking reasons only in California. And I find that really frightening, right? And it's not frightening that they're trying to sell this stuff. Great, good for them. Go make a whole lot of money, right? But what's frightening is that people just buying it hook, line, and sinker. Like it's a done deal, right? And I see this with my own colleagues now. It's just incredible what you get. I have not done a PhD defense in a year where one of the committee members doesn't say, oh, well, you could just use GPT to do that. I read about it on Twitter. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it just makes no sense, right? But people are so willing to believe it that they will just, they'll just discard all other evidence all evidence to the contrary. So I think that's the part that's really frightening. But I think I saw a hand in the back there. Maybe we'll go there first. Yeah. 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 Well, so I would, yeah, I appreciate the point, but I think the people with skin in the game there are Elon Musk and what's his name, Altman at OpenAI. They're not the machines, because they have no way of connecting. They don't know how to connect that to their own survival, right? And the people that are setting those thresholds, the people that are setting those algorithms, that's Elon Musk and whatever his name is, Altman, right? Those are the people who have skin in the game, not the machines. Yeah. 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 No, I appreciate that. I think that I always come at AI from, I guess it's one of its the original sort of notion behind it was to try to understand human intelligence, right? And for me, that's become more about trying to understand human society, human culture. And so from a scientific perspective, I think that I can stand upon the statement that these things are complete garbage, right? But certainly from an application perspective, I agree with you. The potential of self-driving cars to reduce rates of accident on the road is tremendous, right? It really is. We could save thousands and thousands of lives. Still, the number one killer in America, or number two or something, is getting hit by a vehicle, right? So I appreciate what you're saying. I think it's important to keep those two ideas of AI as a kind of engineering thing where we're trying to get things to work, and AI as a scientific discipline where we're trying to understand what is the nature of intelligence. So, I'll get to this gentleman.
Had a question. Aging well with I. Round on automobile. And as you said, there may be evidence.
What's there to find?
Yeah.
That we get there,
Yeah.
we all embrace it.
Yeah.
How it says we should all embrace it.
Yeah.
Change. So.
Yeah.
What's yours? We're good again.
Well, I mean, I think it's some father mentioned, and they took one of his driver's licenses, and it's probably the biggest problem for him. He really looked at it emotionally. He thinks it's his wife. My mother took it away from him. So if he can get a car and go places, that would be great, right? It would definitely improve his standard of living. He's completely dependent on my mother now to drive him, right? If she loses her license, I don't know what they're going to do. So there's definitely the potential for massive social benefits in doing these kinds of things, right? And I think that to embrace a self-driving car is probably taxi in California without a driver. I'm not sure I would. It's too scary, but I think people are really interested in these kinds of technologies. But okay, we just got one more in the back there. Yeah. Yeah, and why we won't use it anymore. I'm in using their own brains than using Google's brain. And those people recently took up playing the guitar, and that's not something Google can do for me. I enjoy the process, right, of learning. So, I'll check, yeah. So that's a big trials, and I think I hope that it doesn't, right? It doesn't take away what humanity has, right? But I guess we'll have to see. So, all right. Thanks. I'm getting sort of station, so you get quite tired.
Jesse, I want to thank you for giving us a perspective on artificial intelligence. We've all been exposed to the doom and gloom in the press. But I think basically, if I can sum up the message, is that any tool throughout the history of humankind can be used for good or evil. Club can be used either to crack a nut or to crack somebody's nut. And, both uses are there. And I think the same you're telling us really applies here. There's some very good things that can be done and should be done with it. And has the potential for some very negative things as well. And we need to be smart enough to figure out how to control the negative side. And
yeah.
Anyway, thanks very much for being
Thanks,
here.
Brian. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Presentation on behalf of CURAC and this group and this week.
All right. Great.
Oh,
thank you. Thank you very much.